Welcome back everyone, this is Al from BluFo Innovations. If you've been following the tutorial series so far, you should have a web page that looks something like this. Now I realize we're excited to add some style to this page, make it look a lot more visually appealing and a lot more interesting, but we're not going to do that just yet. And there's a reason for that. The reason is I want to make it very clear how each of these programming languages is used. So HTML, CSS, and JavaScript each have their separate purposes, which is why I want to focus on only one at a time. So we're going to continue working with HTML today, and we're going to start by building out the main area of our page. So in our last tutorial, we already created the main tag. I'm going to go ahead and split that and then start creating some sections by typing out the section tag. Close it, and then I'm going to use the same shortcut that I used in the last tutorial by holding down Shift and Alt and then pressing the down arrow key and pressing it again to create 3 sections for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But we want to give each one of these sections its own unique identifier, and it serves a couple different purposes. First, it's going to make your code easier to understand and more readable, but it's also going to be very valuable when we go to use CSS and JavaScript. You'll see that later, but for now, we just want to give each of these an ID attribute. So the first one, we're going to give an ID of HTML. The second one, an ID attribute of CSS. And of course, the third one, an ID attribute of JavaScript. And just like that, we've created 3 sections. Now, something I want to do and something I think you should get into a habit of doing is just spacing things out here a little bit. As we start to add more code, more text, more content, things can get very cluttered. So I'm just going to put a little bit of extra space in there, and we're going to start by working on our HTML section. Now the first thing we'll want in our section is a header. So I'm going to go ahead and use an H3 tag, which you may have guessed is a little bit smaller than the H2 tag. And I'm going to call this header HTML lessons. And the next thing we'll want is a list of our HTML lessons. Now you have a couple different options here. I'm going to show you both, but let's start with an unordered list. To do that, I'm going to use a UL, which is an unordered list tag, and that creates an empty list. Within there, we can put our list items. To do that, I'm going to type li, that's a list item, and then I'm going to use that handy shortcut again. So I'm going to use Shift and Alt and then the down arrow key a few times just to create a few empty list items real quickly. And then the text inside of each of these list items is what the user is going to see. So let's call this one first web page. The next one will say creating the header. This one is the main section. That's of course what we're working on now. And then the last one will be creating the footer. And I'm going to go ahead and save it so we can take a look at what our web page looks like. And there's our section with our header and our 4 list items. Now when you use an unordered list, you're going to get something that looks like this with the bullet points. That works great if your list items don't need to be in any specific order. But in our case, we have tutorials that we want people to follow in order. So I'm going to go back to our HTML, and I'm just going to make a small change. I'm going to change this UL tag, which was unordered list, to OL, which is an ordered list. And yes, you have to change both the opening and closing tags. Then we'll save it. And if we go back to our web page, they're now numbered 1 through 4, which is much more functional for what we're doing here. In your case, you just have to choose the option that's best for you. Now let's go create those other sections. Anytime you're developing a website, you want to try and keep your design and structure as consistent as possible. So when I go into my CSS section, I want to build it the same way. I want to give it a header of CSS lessons. Then we're going to create another ordered list. And I'm going to show you another shortcut. So this time, instead of using the Shift Alt arrow key shortcut, I'm going to type li, the multiplication symbol, 5, and when I hit enter, look at that, it creates 5 empty list items for me. Just a different way of doing things. And then let's fill out our list items. So we're going to say, what is CSS? The second item is going to be inline CSS. We'll say external CSS. Then we'll say positioning elements. And the last section will be adaptive styling. That's our CSS section. And then we'll do the same with our JavaScript section. So I'll give this a header of JavaScript lessons. unordered list, and then we'll use that same shortcut again. And this time it's going to be what is JavaScript. We're going to say the DOM, which we'll learn about that later. Then we're going to say getting elements, event listeners, and then we'll say beyond the DOM. And there we go. I'm going to save it, and let's take a look at our web page. And there we go. Again, it looks very simple now because we haven't added styling yet, but you've created 3 sections that fill out the main area of your web page.